New Zealand, one of the safest countries on Earth, consistently ranked among the world's most trusted democracies, a place the world looked at and saw decency. But between 1972 and 1980, something was happening inside a brick building in a quiet paddock near Whanganui. Something the government knew about. Something the medical profession knew about. Something that took 50 years, a United Nations intervention, and a Royal Commission of Inquiry to officially call what it actually was. Torture. Not in a dictatorship. Not behind an iron curtain. In New Zealand. And the victims were not prisoners. Not criminals. Not adults who had broken any law. They were children. The Lake Alice Child and Adolescent Unit opened in 1972. It was supposed to be a place of healing. A psychiatric unit for troubled young people, children referred by doctors, by social workers, by the state itself. Some had behavioral problems. Some had experienced trauma at home. Some had been placed there by parents who were told it was the right thing to do. And some, this is the part that should stop you cold, some had no psychiatric illness at all. None. They were sent there anyway. Between 1972 and 1978 alone, 362 children passed through that unit. The youngest were 5 and 6 years old, and every single one of them was placed under the complete authority of one man, Dr. Selwyn Leeks. Leeks ran the unit like a kingdom. He answered to no one. He was, in the words of staff who worked under him, all-powerful. And inside that unit, he had a method. He called it aversion therapy. He used an electroconvulsive therapy machine, an ECT device, designed for adult psychiatric treatment, administered under anesthetic as a last resort. Leeks used it differently. He used it without anesthetic, without muscle relaxants, at high doses, on children, not to treat illness, to punish behavior. If a child ran away, they were shocked. If a child broke a rule, they were shocked. If a child refused to comply, they were shocked. And it wasn't only applied to the head. The United Nations Committee Against Torture confirmed shocks were applied to children's legs, torsos, and genitals. A clinical psychologist who testified before the Royal Commission said the only comparable use of electricity applied to that part of the human body he had ever read about was the Gestapo. The children screamed. Other children in the ward heard them. Children wet their beds at night from fear of what morning might bring. One survivor, sent there at 13, described it as razor blades cutting through his head. They told adults. They told nurses. They told social workers. And the system closed around them. A nurse who raised concerns was reminded by Leeks that she lived in hospital accommodation, that her home depended on her silence. She said nothing more. Medical associations were told. The psychiatric college knew by the late 1970s. They did not confront Leeks. They did not investigate. They accepted his explanations. They protected the institution over the children inside it. In 1978, while children were still being harmed, a survivor made a sworn statement to a human rights organization. He named what Leeks had done to him. In detail, nothing happened. In 1980, the unit quietly closed. Leeks left New Zealand. He moved to Australia. He continued practicing psychiatry. He was not arrested. He was not charged. He was not stopped. For decades, survivors tried to be heard. Police opened investigations and mismanaged them. Evidence was lost. Key witnesses were overlooked. The Medical Council declined to reinvestigate in 2000, deciding, incorrectly, that earlier inquiries had already handled it. In 2001, 95 survivors reached a settlement with the Crown. $6.5 million, split between them. After legal fees of approximately $2.6 million were deducted, survivors received an average of $41,000 each for what had been done to them as children. And that settlement did not even acknowledge torture. It did not acknowledge the physical abuse. It did not acknowledge the sexual abuse. It said almost nothing. Then the world stepped in. The United Nations Committee Against Torture reviewed New Zealand's record. In 2020, they found New Zealand in direct breach of the Convention Against Torture. They named Lake Alice specifically. They used the word torture. And suddenly, the government could no longer look away. In 2021, the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Abuse in Care held 11 days of hearings. Survivors, now in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, sat in that room and finally told the world what had been done to them when they were children. Police announced they would lay criminal charges. Leeks and one other former staff member, both then in their 90s, were found unfit to stand trial due to failing health. Leeks died in January 2022, aged 91, having never spent a single day in a courtroom, having never faced a jury, having never heard a verdict. In December 2022, the Royal Commission released its full report. They titled it, Beautiful Children. They called Lake Alice a shameful chapter in the history of New Zealand. They confirmed that what happened inside that unit was not medical treatment by any standard, not by today's standards, and not even by the standards of 1972. In July 2024, the New Zealand government formally acknowledged, for the first time, that torture had occurred at the Lake Alice unit, 50 years after it began. In December 2024, the government set aside $22.68 million for a redress scheme. Survivors who were still alive could apply. 144 eligible registrations were received. 144 out of 362. The rest did not make it long enough to receive so much as an apology. Now here is what they do not put in the history books. New Zealand was not alone, while children screamed inside Lake Alice. In Canada, Indigenous children at residential schools were being used in nutritional experiments, deliberately starved to test the effects of malnutrition. We covered that. In Ireland, thousands of women and children were imprisoned in Magdalene laundries, owned by the Catholic Church, contracted by the state. We covered that. In Spain, hundreds of thousands of babies were stolen from their mothers by a network of doctors and priests from the 1930s all the way into the 1990s. We covered that. In Switzerland, children as young as 6 were contracted out as farm laborers under a government-sanctioned system. We covered that. In Australia, Indigenous children were forcibly removed from their families for generations under official government policy. In the United States, children at the Dozier School for Boys were beaten, abused, and buried in unmarked graves, with full state knowledge. In Belgium, the Congo Free State. In Argentina, babies stolen during the Dirty War. In Norway, Sami children stripped of their language and identity by deliberate state policy. Japan, South Korea, Canada, Ireland, Germany, France, the United Kingdom. Every one of these stories follows the same pattern. A trusted institution, a vulnerable child, a government that looked the other way, and decades, sometimes a lifetime, before anyone in power said the word sorry. We are going to cover every single one of those stories on this channel. The ones you've heard of, and the ones that will genuinely shock you. Because the world needs to know these children existed. The world needs to know their names were filed away in government folders and their screams were heard by people who chose to do nothing. If you believe that history belongs to the people it happened to, not to the institutions that caused it, then you know what to do right now. Share this video. Leave a comment with the word Alice, so this channel knows you heard them. And subscribe, because the next story we're covering is one that happened in a country you completely trust. A country that has never once appeared on any list of human rights violators. And what they did to children inside one building, for over 30 years, makes Lake Alice look like the beginning. We will see you there.